I teach in a lot of different situations from one-on-one, and I teach in a really good private music school in Rio de Janeiro, and you know, of course, I give workshops. And basically, one of the basic things that I try to teach at whatever level I'm teaching is that music theory has to be, our ideas about music theory have to be continually revised. In other words, the major-minor key dichotomy, which is still taught as the music theory, is a good idea, and you know, it worked for Beethoven and Bach and the guys, but a lot of other systems in European classical music and modern day, there are no more really frontiers. People used to be talking about the French school of composing, and you know, the Vienna school, and the American school. But it's a global village now. You know, everyone's got iPads and internet and YouTube. So you can access different cultures very quickly. I mean, if you want to hear some Balinese music, or you want to hear some Chinese music, or some African traditional drumming, or some Cuban chanting, you can get it on YouTube. I consider you people are really the YouTube generation. It's probably going to last for another 5 years, and then it's going to be something else. But this is
plug right in.
Yeah, it's good, and it's good. But you know, the other thing is it's sort of an information overload. You know, there's so much information out there. So you know, one of the things that you know, there's got to be a balance. It's great to get a lot of information, and there's a yin and yang of being open and trying to open yourself up to a lot of musical experience and information in different cultures. And at a certain time, you have to sort of focus and make your own synthesis. But basically, you can't analyze Chinese or African or blues or flamenco music with the tools of you know, 17th, 18th, up until, you know, the end of the 19th century, tools of musical analysis. Or to quote Stravinsky said, music theory doesn't exist. It has neither the power to create nor explain music. However, he continued, any good composer has a deep intuition for theory. So he's saying you have to know what you're doing, but the rules of the game can and should be completely varied. So in other words, you take a blues scale, and the real blues scale, which is not written in, okay, I'll say the name, Jamie Ebersole, and a lot of other books.
Is that marker working?
Sort of.
Let me see if I can grab
something heavier. This is the blues scale, and I write it in a slightly different order, coming down. The real blues scale has the major and the minor third in it, and the flatted fifth, or the sharp fourth, and the perfect fifth. So right there, we're completely outside of the, you know, I'm pretty sure, 90% sure that you've seen this scale written without the major third, which seems to me an unconscious attempt to assimilate the blues scale with a minor tonality, or an incapacity to conceive of a tonality which is major and minor at the same time.
blue for
jazz. Blue for blues.
Get rid of this one.
Thank you. So that's one. So right there are tonic chord. You could have them, if we're working with diatonic triads, our tonic chord could be a minor triad, It could be a major triad. It could be a diminished triad. It could even be a major triad with a flat fifth. Because this fourth, augmented fourth can also, of course, so all of a sudden we're in a harmonic area which is very open, just using our diatonic materials with no borrowed tones. And the same thing is true with the flamenco scale, which they call andalou. I'll write it in E. People call the Spanish Phrygian. Chick Corea and other people call it the flamenco scale. I'll just call it Spanish Phrygian. And this is the basis of a lot of North African music, and also the basis of a lot of the deep flamenco and Afro-Cuban music. So this also has the minor third and the major third. So all of a sudden we have, just talking about triads, we have a minor triad, we have a major triad, and we also have an augmented triad as possible tonic triads. And as seventh chords with diatonic materials, we have a minor seventh or a dominant seventh. And this can also be conceived as, I'm going to write them in second inversion, as three major triads over an E pedal, which are E, F, and G major triads.
So the difference between that scale and a normal Phrygian scale is you have an added note.
It's an eight, exactly. It's an 8-tone scale. Some people talk. I mean, there's a catchword. People call them synthetic scales. I don't know why it should be synthetic, but because it's the basis of a lot of the world's music, a ton of the world's music. There's a funny story. I went 3 times to Algeria to play in the jazz festival there. And the first time I met a very, very cultured, very opinionated, but very cultured Algerian journalist who sort of befriended me and took me to the downs. So he took me to the Kasbah, which is considered a pretty rough neighborhood. And he said, yeah, back in the 9th century AD, we had to cross the Mediterranean, civilize those Spaniards, because they didn't have anything. They didn't have music, they didn't have medical science, they didn't have astronomy, they didn't have mathematics. So, he wasn't really joking. He said it sort of in a joking way, but history backs him up. I mean, Spanish music comes from the North African influence. I mean, the flamenco is pretty much straight up Maghreb. Maghreb is Morocco, Algeria, northern Mali.
Now you were referring to, when you were talking about Western theory and numerical analysis, how it breaks down. Because that's one of the things we kind of talk a little bit in this class, is that we've been transcribing these sort of modern compositions that really are, they're not completely chromatic, but they can't necessarily be easily analyzed and numerically.
Let's take one great example. I saw your sheet, which actually I want a copy of monkisms.
Oh yeah, okay.
Thelonious is one guy who really, you have Monk and you have, a few others, Cecil Taylor, and then you have the whole vast majority of people who are working in the common language, common practice. Common practice evolves in any musical sphere. I mean, common practice in writing classical. What I'm trying to say is contemporary music it's a relative notion. Charles Ives was writing stuff which is way more modern than most of the stuff that we play back in 1910 or 1905. Polytonality and intervallic stuff, and so You know, Bach was as contemporary as you get. Bach invented the even-tempered, you know, system, and you know, Bach's got major 7, sharp 5, and minor major 7ths, and Chopin had all the altered 7th chords possible, you know. So basically, you want to not be stuck in your language, whatever you're dealing with. Bebop sort of got stuck in a certain language, which is like, you know, you had a certain number of alterations that you could put on each, you know, if you know them, you're 2nd or 3rd or 4th year students in jazz at, you know, University of New Orleans. Basically, you probably know that usually it's a, you know, the 13th can be combined with the 9th, but for instance, how about putting a normal 9 with a sharp 9 in the same dominant 7th chord? I mean, okay. So you got a normal. That's not considered common practice. I could do it differently, of course. Identify the alterations in the 7th chord?
It's a 9 in here, sharp 9.
Sharp 9, what else? You said it. Sharp 9, normal 9, and 13th. So here's our 9th and our 13th chord, and I added a sharp 9. Monk also would use this type of combination outside of the common practice of that time, as sometimes as like a sort of a blue note within an altered 7th chord. You could hit that sharp 9 and just sort of give it a color and then resolve to the 9th, the regular 9th. Okay, so that's one example of I could also combine the two 13ths, the flat 13th and the normal 13th. Here's a normal chord, which you know, which is sharp 9, flat 13th. Okay, so let's add the natural 13th. And all these can be arpeggiated. If you are single note people, you can play all this stuff. You might decide to leave out the root. I left out actually the 7th and the root. If you put the 7th into your arpeggio, 7th, 3rd, flat 13th, 13th, sharp 9. No one's writing anything down.
It's all on tape. The NSA's got it all there.
Everyone's going to go to the library and burn the DVD. So I'm dating myself, right? When I was a boy, we used to go to music class with pen and music notebook, music paper. But that was long ago. Oh my God, life moves on. Okay, so does anyone have any questions, remarks? Please feel free to
No, I think, I mean, it's interesting about Monk especially because, you know, he's considered a bebop musician because he's from the bebop era, but he really developed his own. He really developed his own language within that, and it's very much based on intervallic structures, you know, which was kind of like, you know, the minor second, the flat 9 interval, flat 5 interval. So a lot of his chords and a lot of his melodies kind of take, you know, he basically does everything what we normally tell jazz musicians are in terms of orchestration and stuff like that not to do. From his first records, that became part of his language.
From his first records, from the 1948-49 records, it's completely different. But bebop was just a marketing term anyway. So
tell us what, you know, what advice would you give in this day and age to young musicians to think, you know, knowing that there's so much information now that we didn't have when we were younger, you know, like that you have access to on the computer. And how do you not get scatterbrained, or what's the attention deficit disorder? You know, where like,
Well,
I like this, I like that, I like
actually-
this, I like this. And how do you stay focused? And you know, how do you young people work towards a specific goal? in their
Okay,
life?
that's a great question. I've been thinking a lot about the attention deficit disorder because I feel that in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been giving workshops for a long time. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's really gotten worse at all levels, including elementary and preschool. I mean, I see kids, and my twin girls are 5. And I see the kids in the schools, I mean, they're working. I saw a little girl in the airport. She was like 5 or 6 and she was playing computer games. But the problem is they don't really read books anymore. Or people are going to go to Wikipedia. You know, if you have a paper and you're going to go to Wikipedia and you're going to think that that's really what it is. I mean, that's someone's digest of some other sources. But what I would say is that go to the source. Pick 2 or 3 musical worlds. You know, I basically picked 4, although I don't deal with Cuban music as deeply as I do with Brazilian music, because I live in Brazil and I've been going to Brazil for 33 years. I've been living there for 12. I did go to Cuba for 3 weeks and I studied that closely, and I went to Banff in Canada and studied Cuban music with Chucho Valdez for 10 days, 12 days. When I was 18 already, I was studying jazz, but I realized I was never going to play bebop like, you know, Bud Powell or Barry Harris. And so I want to find my own path. And I think when I went to Brazil for the first time, I had very limited knowledge about Brazilian music. You know, I knew Joe Beam's tunes, I knew a few Luis Bonfá tunes, or a few Roberto Menescal tunes. And I heard this amazing, which is still a landmark album, also in terms of cultural synthesis, Native Dancer by Wayne Shorter, featuring Milton Nascimento and Robert Chiu Silva on drums. I mean, if you don't know it, it is really a landmark. It's half Brazilian and half North American jazz musicians, and it really showed that it could be done. Of course, Stan Getz, you know, Stan Getz was basically the only North American on the great sessions with João Gilberto on guitar, and basically find 2 or 3 areas, musical areas, that you want to focus and try to find your own synthesis. I personally feel that right from the jump, whatever you're working on, you should be composing tunes for yourself to play, but also things that are studies, like etudes. I think that the best way to get a personal style is to write your own practice pieces, write your own practice methods. In other words, I think that there's, again, it's a yin and yang, the order and the disorder, to introduce or to allow a certain amount of entropy or chaos into your practice routine, I think is good. In other words, it's deadly to practice the same scales and exercises and pieces every day for months and months. Although if you're dealing with classical music and you see someone who's preparing a classical recital, that's very often what they will do. They'll pick the 5 or 6 pieces that they're going to record or going to play, and they'll just practice those pieces for 6 months. But it's a different mindset. It's about technically perfecting a set of pieces, a very limited set of pieces, you know, which is not necessarily our mindset. I'm currently going through a little bit of this, a difficult phase, because next week I'm going to play for the first time a recital of my 24 jazz preludes, and it's all written. And it's a lot of written notes, and despite the fact that I wrote them, the first volume in '96 and the second volume in '97, is 24 pieces, all. And I have and can improvise on some of them, but on these 24 pieces, at this time, I'm not going to improvise. I'm going to play some other stuff that I improvise. I'll show you a few. I want to play one of those pieces for you because it illustrates the scale and it illustrates a compositional technique where you can build harmonies out of scales. So the first piece, the first chord of this piece it's strictly within the Spanish Phrygian scale in E flat. And it's a pile of it's a stack of interlocking triads, but they're all in there. The A flat minor, E major, E minor, E diminished, E flat major, and E flat minor. And it's all in that scale. few non-written notes in there in the middle. Got carried away and wanted to improvise. I love this area.
You also using, because we've been talking a little bit about chordal harmony, chordal and quintal harmony, and how it was sort of introduced into jazz with, Coltrane and that era, and it sort of suggests pentatonic melodies and maybe more chromaticism. And I noticed that you were kind of using those kind of voicings when you were playing. Can you talk a little bit about that? About like trying to play inside and outside the tonality? I guess you were kind of sticking more to the Phrygian modality.
That's two sort of topics for me. Three, pentatonics and fourths and fifths, and then playing outside. I'll try to address them sequentially.
Yeah, it's scatterbrain.
First of all, again, traditional harmony deals with chords in thirds, basically stacks of thirds. You have the triads, you have the seventh chords, you have the ninth, you have the 11th, and the 13th. It's all thirds. And so that will determine or suggest a mode. We have several mode choices for each color. So if I choose Lydian, for instance, C Lydian, we have the diatonic triads, C Lydian, and we also have the diatonic sevenths. Okay, so this is a very interesting difference between a Lydian harmony and a major scale harmony, because the Lydian harmony is a major seventh on 5. Okay, so that's one way of, first of all, just very basically, very quickly, each mode is its own tonal center. I know that you have all learned that C Lydian is what of what?
4.
Yeah.
Okay. You will now forget that. Because if I do this, my question is simple. Where's G major? Nowhere. There's no G major. It's C Lydian. C Lydian is our tonic. It's an interesting way to find the modes of the major scale faster, because you've all studied the major scales on your instrument first. But that's about as far as I consider this theory of modes to be useful. It's just it goes off the cliff there. Miles Davis, with a lot of help from Bill Evans, who had some help from George Russell, wrote the piece. So what? In 1958, you've all heard it. I won't play it. There's two tonalities there. There's D Dorian and E flat Dorian. There is not even a whiff of C major or D flat major there. So with that in mind, we have each mode determines its own tonality. Chinese people use pentatonic scales as their tonality. Most Asiatic cultures, and you can build chords out of this. It's like instant Chinese music. I'm not an expert at Chinese music, but I mean, I could do it with, the Japanese might use this pentatonic. It's a tonality. It's a 5-note tonality. So
There's no way to make progression within that, right? Like within a 5-note tonality.
okay, my answer to that would be to look at Chopin's G flat major etude. which is built exclusively of the G-flat major pentatonic scale in the right hand, but he throws in the kitchen sink in the left hand. It's entirely based on the here. And also I would recommend that you look at Alexander Cheretnin's music, including his concert etudes. So there are ways to get progressions, but harmonized with other tools, with other notes outside of the scale. So let's go back to our C Lydian, to your first question. So how do we organize fourth chords? You can also make 3-note fourth chords. So our tonality, instead of having diatonic sevenths or diatonic triads, we now have diatonic 3-note chords and fourths, which are perfectly unaugmented. So our tonic chord is now C major 7, sharp 4, no 3. Our second degree is D7 sus 4, no 5, but that's not really essential. Same thing on 3, same thing on 4. Our dominant chord is now a major 7 sus 4. And then you have 2 more chords with dominant 7 sus 4. So that's our tonality in 3-note chords and fourths in C Lydian. We can get more specific and richer if we go to 4 notes. Our tonic chord is now a C major 7th with a sharp 4. Our second degree is now a D7th sus 4. This can be either called an added 3, or we can consider it a 17th as an upper structure. 9, 11, 13, 15, 17. And so on. So you can analyze the 3-note and 4-note and the 6-note chords. If you are a single note people, you can play all this as arpeggios. And you can treat that with permutation. You can take 3-note groups, and instead of doing 1, 2, 3, you have 6 orders and 3 notes, so you can decide to do 2, 1, 3. So this is an excellent way to build your technique, to learn the modes in a very concrete and practical way, and to extend the intervals that you play on your instruments. If you're a pianist, you can take this to another level, because since we have 2 hands and we can do totally independent things with our 2 hands, we could decide to do the same thing in the same mode in 2 different keys, or different modes in the 2 hands. So I mean, let's take a really basic. Flat Lydian here, and I'm in C Lydian. So I can treat this contrapuntally. I can do a free improvisation with these 2 modes. I'm in 2 Lydian modes simultaneously. That's a very systematic application. If I'm playing in a freer context, I can think about this. I think last year I played a that's called polytonal or polymodal counterpoint. Let's call it polytonal counterpoint. So you can do the same thing in fifths. I like to take what I call stacks of fifths. So let's go back to our C leading context. And you can do different types of chords. So that's a modal chord in fifths. C, G, D, E, B, F sharp. That defines C major 7th and the 9th and a sharp 11th. So one very basic tool, we can now combine the modal idea and the intervallic idea with the cyclofifths. So you can learn these voicings quickly and in an efficient manner. So you could take this, I like this chord, so let's play through cyclofifths. Fourth and a fifth. Piano players don't look at your notes. Piano players arpeggiate both of them at the same time. Do it in contra notion. Okay, so I like these ideas. I can also build a minor 7th with, for instance, let's stay in the same mode. When I get to a third, I have to just stack 2 perfect fifths, a minor 2nd, a perfect 5th, and a perfect 5th. I do it on the 3rd degree of C Lydian. That makes E minor 7th, the 11th. So that's another structure that you should definitely learn with the cycle. Okay, so I like fourths and I like fifths. Why not combine the two in the same chord? And it becomes what I call a hybrid voicing. A hybrid voicing is no longer based exclusively on one interval. It can be based on fourths and fifths. And anyway, if you invert the situation, you can use the same rules. So I still consider this basically a fourth voicing, although there's a little plus in the middle because I have this fourth, I have this fourth, this fourth. So I just changed the order here. But okay. So let's have fifths here and fourths here. So I'm going to go up the scale with 2 perfect fifths and the fourths, 3 fourths. That's wrong. That's one very basic way, but I mean you could take this one here, the 2 perfect fifths, and you could even put the 4th chord. You could superimpose them. I still consider this a hybrid chord because I have a 4th chord here, even though it's overlapping with the 5th chord. And this chord you can use. A sus 4. You can use it as an E minor 7. You can use it, of course, as the C Lydian sound. D7 sus 4 with the 17th. In other words, when you get in the mode, when you start really opening up your study and your real knowledge, because it's okay to say, okay, I know I can play all those Lydian scales, but I just gave you a sequence which is going to be a lot of months of study. You can do all the Lydian scales first as diatonic triads in root position, and then in first inversion. And then in second version, and then the diatonic sevenths. this. This is a nice exercise. It's diatonic sevenths and C Lydian and second inversion. And then all the different types of chords. It doesn't matter if you're single note people. If you are a single note person, you should be able to play then the fourth, 3-note fourth chords. A real basic move is up and down. Let's try to do a real fingering. A real piano fingering. Work out the legato fingering. It's going to put your fingers, and then of course, four notes, it becomes a stretching exercise, at least on the piano. I don't know, but is this hard on the guitar, Steve?
If you go beyond 4 notes, it gets harder.
But with 4 notes.
Yeah, 4 notes, it kind of lays better, because it's the guitar's tuned in 4s essentially,
Right.
So it's easier to do that.
But you have that third in there.
Yeah, you got the third.
So, but anyone can play this. Any trumpet player, guitar player. Guitarists can do this in chords too. And then start applying permutations. 3-note fourth chords, 4-note fourth chords, up to 6-note fourth chords. Okay.
I have a comping question related to that. Now, when you're playing with someone, I don't know, let's say you're playing in D Dorian or C Lydian or whatever, and you're comping behind someone that's essentially in that modality, but he goes outside the modality. Do you have any certain, other than just using your ear, what do you do to support someone? Like, if you're playing with Rick Margitzo and he starts to go crazy outside the tone.
You might just stop playing.
You might just stop. Well, that's true. He actually,
that's one.
He does that a lot. He doesn't tend to go out in a chordal and quintal way, like a predictable way. He tends to do it in a more free, chromatic way, which doesn't sound like it really needs any guitar. A lot of times he tells me just to lay out.
Well, there's different schools of thought. Sometimes he would ask me to lay out.
Right. Yeah, right.
And sometimes that would be part of
it.
And I'm just reading a sort of opinionated but interesting Bill Cole's biography of Coltrane, but it's got some interesting stuff in it. And he's talking about McCoy, where McCoy was, it was understood that at a certain point in most of the pieces that the piano and the bass would lay out, because McCoy felt that Coltrane with Elfin were getting to a place where that was really the core of what Coltrane wanted to express. But again, Coltrane is a very special case because he got to his free period after a very intense mastering of and expanding of tonality and root progressions and playing inside and then playing modally. It was all compressed into he had such a terribly short career, but he sort of synthesized, from root blues and bebop and modal music, he was there at the kind of blue, dealing with the modal language. And then at the end, his free playing it's so beyond, because he had such complete control of the harmonic language. So I can't really, this is a very advanced concept, but basically if you can play a polytonal chord as an arpeggio, you can also put, for instance, 2 different arpeggios, and you can run them up a mode, but you can also just say, okay, I like this sound, D major triad over C major triad, and so I can run that up any scale, and I can use, for instance, I'll just run it up and hold it. A single note person. this is a symmetrical way to get out of and come back into a mode. Because this first set of two triads is inside C Dorian, if we're still considering C Dorian our tonic or our tonal area, be it temporary tonal center or not. Does that answer your question? I mean,
Yeah,
it's one
yeah.
way to get out. I mean, but I could also say, okay, I'm going to do the same.
I guess my question is like if you know if you're agreeing to play in D minor, for instance,
Yeah.
and then the saxophone player or the guitar player or whatever starts playing side slipping or whatever, do you outside, you know, in other words, he's stepping outside to create tension against the D minor tonality. Do you how do you or do you have a certain method by which to support that? Or do you just stay put in D minor, let him play outside the tonality, or do you try to play more chromatically with him? Or?
Yeah, I would definitely try to play more chromatically. And for instance, I can take a sus4 voicing. A trick that I like to use is to go up like a half-tone, whole-tone scale. So it doesn't sound so outside. It's pretty outside.
Mm-hmm.
But if you even use a fragment of that, you can get away. I started at D. It's a sus thing, but that would work in a D minor situation. If you want to take it a little farther, you could take a shape which is two major third, two perfect fourths, and an augmented fourth. And you can run that same shape. I just ran this is perfect fourth, and sharp fourth, augmented fourth. Something else. D mixolydian. Intervallics. I would use intervallics. I would start playing intervallically. A very interesting and simple exercise, I think, to develop this is to take just a regular blues progression, and it's a very simple, on the surface, it's a very simple exercise, improvisation exercise. You will stay within the blues harmony for the first chorus, and in the second chorus you will play intervallically, but you will be counting the measures, so you have to know where you are. That's one routine.
What do you mean by intervallically?
You'll hear it. if you keep doing this for a while, the ideas intuitively, organically, after a couple, 10, 12, 14 courses, the intervallic stuff will start to bleed into the harmonic stuff, and you'll be able to mix these two mindsets. You know, it's because it's another discipline. It's free. I'll leave you with two thoughts about free music. My first jazz piano teacher was Hall Overton. Who, those of you who don't know who he was, brilliant musician who arranged Monk at Town Hall and Monk at the Philharmonic, and recorded a trio album with Oscar Pettiford, Duke music, and was also a terrific contemporary composer. Anyway, he said, there's no freedom in music without discipline. And Nadia Boulanger told me one day, she said, well, she said a couple really basic things. She said, sometimes I'm listening to a piece of music and I realize that I haven't been paying enough attention. You know, there are degrees of listening to a music, you know, if you're, you know, you're out on a first date and you put on some nice music, you know, some Shirley Horn or some Sarah Vaughan or some laid back Miles Davis. I mean, you know, that's a certain type of music, but you're really probably more focused on the conversation with that specific special other than the actual musical structures. And, you know, if obviously you're preparing for your music analysis final exam, you're going to listen to the piece with more attention. But, you know, there's the famous story about Charlie Parker. It's a fairly true story. Bird is the younger musician, and they're walking down the street, and there was some guy playing some country music on the piano in this little bar, and Bird stopped and listened. And, you know, the cat who was with him said, "Oh, Bird, you know, what do you listen to this lame stuff?" And Bird told him, you know, always have something to learn. Charlie Parker, you know. So Charlie Parker also got a job washing dishes in a restaurant where Art Tatum was playing solo piano every night. When Bird first came to, he wanted to cop some of the harmonic stuff. So that was how serious Charlie Parker was about learning music, since, you know, he didn't have a university degree, probably didn't have a high school degree, but he really was serious about learning the music. So, you know, he did what he had to do. We work modally, we work polytonally, and so I'm going to give you very briefly, this is the big book, for instance. This is the big book. If you're interested, I'm going to leave a few flyers. I am no longer humping this around with me on the road, but you can get it from Henry Lemoine Publishing Company. You have to figure out how to use their authors list. I'll send a link to Steve. It's a very complete book which has a lot of different stuff for piano type people and single note people, and this is my latest book with the same last publication, and I'm going to play a few pieces out of it because these are, it's called Shapes, and the subtitle is 10 Intervallic Studies for Solo Instruments. So I here consciously avoided any chord progressions, although it's not atonal music. It's not 12-tone music. There are chords, and some of them have a jazz feel. So it's a sort of an interesting hybrid. I'll throw out another word for you, meta-language. Meta-language. Meta-language is if you take video and poetry and dance and a live jazz band, and everyone is improvising. And now there's the technology so that someone's playing MIDI, your MIDI can influence what's going on the video screen, you know. And maybe the dancer is wearing some sensors, but even without all the technology, just introducing at least two different art forms together, if it's well done, is a meta language. At the beginning, television had the potential to be a meta language. It has since become something completely different. But anyway, these are some intervallic structures. And as a pianist, I just like to play them as in double octaves. So this, very briefly, I'm working with spirals, interval spirals. Minor second, major second, minor third, major third, perfect fourth, augmented fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, major sixth, minor seven, major seven, octave. But I'm making it swing. Here my routine was major sevens followed by major triads followed by augmented triads. So it's a series of musical games, you know. This is a thing you're talking about, Rick Margitz, and Rick has a thing where he goes up minor triads in major sevenths. Rick is funny. He has another thing that I like to show me. It's a major 7 sharp 5, and you go back down to the minor third and the perfect fifth. It turns into the augmented scale. And I asked Rick, so where do you use that? He says, wherever I want.
Right. Well, that's the thing I think is so impressive about him is he seems to be able to superimpose that stuff on any song, and it seems to work.
Okay, but the thing is, you have two augmented triads. You have the C augmented triad and the E flat augmented triad. And we all know where we could use these. You know, we might use the C augmented triad as an upper structure for D7, and etc. So if you have a 6-note structure, which is 2 triads, if one of those triads relates to the chord that you're on top of, up to a certain point you are relating to the harmony, and since it's an intervallic structure which is sort of symmetrical because it's got these augmented scales, you can D7. Especially if you leave that last, more tonally relevant part of the form, you can go in and out of the harmony, this is another answer to your original question, in a symmetrical fashion. Or run it up by whole steps. Again. 9, 5, 9. So I'm going to play this last one, and I'm going to have to go to the next stop on my world tour of New Orleans. So basically, they're minor triads. They're either going down by half steps or up by major steps. So, I'm going to have to go now, but I do have, the Jazz Boutique is here today and also will be here tonight. The Jazz Boutique is, today consists of my jazz prelude books, and I have some CDs, and I also have, for the first time, I have digital download cards for the student price of $5. And you go to cdbaby.com. You do a one-time only code, and you download the whole album. This is the new formula, also very good for people like myself who have turned 60, don't want to drag huge suitcases full of merchandise around. It's really nice stocking stuffer and etc. So I want to thank Steve Mazikowski
Thank you.
once again for being here, and I also want you to visit me on the web. Got free music there, free MP3, real simple, jeffgardner.com.br for Brazil. And if you want to keep in touch with me, jeffgardnerjazz@gmail.com, whoever wants a card. And I am at the Sandbar in a
Right,
few
Sandbar
hours.
tonight, so he's playing with the Ricky Sebastian's World Beat Ensemble and Ed Peterson's combo tonight.
And I will
so-
have a very special quartet at Snug Harbor on Saturday with Doug Belote and Peter Harris and the amazing Tony Negrati.
Oh, wow.
So
Cool.
playing my original music. So we want to see you out there. And so as I will leave you with what Betty Carter said. She said, you have to want it real bad and you have to give it time. Thank you so much.
All right, Thank you so much.